March 7th, 1945. A stone bridge over the Sauer River near the German-Luxembourg border. Sergeant Raymond Caldwell crouched behind a wall of sandbags on the riverbank, his heart slamming against his ribs as he watched the first German truck roll onto the bridge, then the second, then the third. The convoy stretched back nearly half a mile along the winding mountain road, 24 vehicles in total, loaded with ammunition, fuel, medical supplies and reinforcements desperately needed by Wehrmacht units crumbling under the Allied advance. This was one of the last functioning supply routes into Western Germany, and the Germans trusted it completely. That trust was about to kill them. Raymond had spent 11 days preparing this bridge. 11 days of crawling through freezing water in the dark, of calculating weight distributions and stress points, of enduring the laughter and ridicule of every officer and engineer in his battalion who thought his plan was the fantasy of a man who had read too many adventure novels. Now 14 trucks were on the span, 15, 16. The ancient stones groaned under the weight. The wooden planks flexed and creaked. Raymond's hand hovered over the detonator, not for explosives, but for something far more elegant. A single cable hidden beneath the waterline, connected to the iron pins he had spent 3 nights replacing, with carefully weakened substitutes. 18 trucks, 19, 20. The bridge was not going to explode. It was going to slide. Raymond pulled the cable. For one eternal second, nothing happened. Then the center of the bridge shifted sideways, the stone pillars separated from their foundations, and the entire middle section, carrying 14 fully loaded German trucks, tilted and crashed into the freezing March waters of the Sauer. The sound was like nothing Raymond had ever heard. Stone grinding against stone, metal screaming against metal, men shouting in German as they leaped from cabs into the churning current. Trucks tumbled over each other, canvas covers tearing, crates of ammunition bursting open and scattering into the river like confetti. On the far bank, the remaining trucks slammed their brakes. Officers stumbled out, staring in disbelief at the chaos below. On Raymond's side, soldiers who had been positioned for exactly this moment opened fire, pinning down anyone who tried to escape. And Raymond Caldwell, the sergeant everyone had called a fool, stood frozen behind his sandbags, watching his impossible idea become impossible reality, understanding for the first time that he had just changed the course of the war in this valley, and that nothing would ever be the same again. If you are watching from anywhere in the world, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We bring you stories from World War II that reveal the human cost of war, the ingenuity, the courage, and the moments that history almost forgot. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. These stories survive because we remember them together. Raymond Caldwell was born in 1919 in the river town of Marietta, Ohio, where the Muskingum meets the Ohio River, and bridges were as common as churches. His father, William Caldwell, was a civil engineer who had spent 30 years building and maintaining the spans that connected communities across the Ohio Valley. Stone bridges, iron bridges, wooden bridges, bridges that carried trains, and bridges that carried nothing but foot traffic and hope. Raymond grew up on construction sites, surrounded by the smell of wet concrete and the sound of hammers ringing against steel. By the time he was 10, he could read blueprints. By 12, he understood the mathematics of load distribution, how weight moved through a structure, where stress concentrated, what made a bridge stand, and what made it fall. His father taught him something else too, the art of controlled failure. Every bridge, William explained, was designed to fail in a specific way if it was pushed beyond its limits. A good engineer knew exactly how much weight a structure could bear, exactly which components would give way first, exactly how the collapse would proceed if the worst happened. This knowledge was not morbid, it was essential. Understanding how things broke was the key to building things that did not break. Raymond absorbed these lessons the way other boys absorbed baseball statistics. He spent his summers working alongside his father's crews, learning to read the subtle signs of structural stress. He learned that bridges were not static objects, but living systems constantly responding to temperature, moisture, traffic, and time. The most important lesson came in 1936, when Raymond was 17. A flood had damaged a critical railroad bridge over the Muskingum, and the railroad company wanted it repaired in 3 days, an impossible timeline. William studied the structure for hours, then announced his plan. Instead of rebuilding the damaged sections, he would weaken them further in a controlled pattern. Then use the river's current to shift the debris out of the way, while his crew reinforced the remaining supports. Everyone said it was insane. The bridge would collapse completely. The railroad would sue. William Caldwell would be ruined. 3 days later, trains were crossing the bridge again. The controlled demolition had worked exactly as William predicted, clearing the damaged sections and creating space for rapid reinforcement. The railroad paid double the contracted fee. Raymond never forgot that moment. He never forgot the expressions on the faces of the men who had called his father a fool, watching the impossible become possible through a combination of engineering knowledge and creative destruction. When war came to Europe in 1939, Raymond was working as a junior engineer for the Ohio Department of Transportation. When America entered the war in 1941, he enlisted immediately, requesting assignment to the Army Corps of Engineers. His skills were exactly what the military needed: bridge building, road construction, the rapid deployment of infrastructure in hostile conditions. But Raymond had another skill that the Army did not yet know it needed. He understood not just how to build bridges, but how to make them fail. The Army sent Raymond to North Africa in late 1942, attached to the 540th Engineer Combat Regiment, supporting Operation Torch. His official duties involved construction, building temporary bridges, repairing roads, clearing obstacles for advancing troops. But the North African campaign also taught him something that no engineering school could: the strategic value of destruction. The Germans were masters of demolition. As they retreated across Tunisia, they destroyed everything: bridges, roads, railways, water systems. Raymond's unit spent weeks rebuilding what the Wehrmacht had torn down, and in the process, he studied their methods with obsessive attention. The Germans did not simply blow things up, they destroyed infrastructure in ways designed to maximize delay. A bridge might be dropped into a river at an angle that blocked the channel. A road might be cratered in a pattern that forced traffic into ambush zones. Raymond filled notebooks with observations. He sketched the patterns of German demolition, analyzed the placement of their charges, reverse-engineered their thinking. He began to understand destruction as a form of engineering, just as precise, just as mathematical, just as dependent on understanding how systems worked. His commanding officer noticed Raymond's unusual interest and assigned him to a small team tasked with analyzing German defensive techniques. The work was tedious, but Raymond treated it as an education more valuable than any university degree. By the time the regiment shipped to Italy in 1943, Raymond had developed a theory that he shared with no one. The most effective way to destroy enemy infrastructure was not always to blow it up. Explosions were obvious. They announced themselves. They gave the enemy time to react, to reroute, to adapt. But subtle sabotage, modifications that weakened a structure without visibly changing it, could be far more devastating. A bridge that looked intact but collapsed under the weight of heavy traffic. A road that appeared solid but crumbled when tanks tried to cross. A building that seemed safe but would fall at the worst possible moment. The idea fascinated Raymond, but he knew better than to propose it to his superiors. The Army valued straightforward solutions. Build this, blow up that, move forward. Creative destruction was not in the manual. Italy reinforced his thinking. The campaign up the peninsula was brutal, a grinding advance through mountains and rivers where every bridge mattered. Raymond built dozens of spans under fire, watched them destroyed, rebuilt them again, and he kept studying, kept refining his theory of invisible destruction. The opportunity to test that theory came in March 1945 in the forests of Western Germany. By February 1945, the Allied armies were pressing into Germany from all directions. The Wehrmacht was collapsing, but it was not defeated. Millions of German soldiers still fought, still killed, still died. Raymond's unit was attached to the Third Army, pushing toward the Rhine through heavily forested hills along the German-Luxembourg border. The terrain was brutal: steep valleys, fast rivers, narrow roads that wound through dense forest. Every river crossing was a potential disaster, every bridge a choke point where advancing columns could be ambushed or destroyed. The Germans knew this. They had spent months fortifying the region, Mining bridges, positioning artillery to cover crossing points. Most bridges had already been destroyed by retreating Wehrmacht units. The few that remained were closely watched by American intelligence, which monitored German supply convoys, using them to move reinforcements and materiel to the collapsing front. One bridge in particular drew Raymond's attention, a stone span over the Sauer River near a village called Echternach. The bridge was old, built in the 1890s according to captured German documents, but solid, capable of carrying heavy truck traffic. The Germans used it constantly, running supply convoys through the night to avoid Allied aircraft. American command wanted the bridge destroyed. Bombing raids had been attempted, but failed. The span was too narrow, the valley too deep. A commando raid was proposed, but rejected as too risky. Raymond studied the intelligence reports, the aerial photographs, the engineering assessments. And he saw something that no one else seemed to notice. The bridge was old. Its construction predated modern engineering standards, and the way the stone pillars connected to the wooden deck, the iron pins that held the sections together, represented a vulnerability that explosives could not exploit, but careful sabotage might. He requested a meeting with his battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Barrett. Barrett was a career officer, competent but conventional. Raymond knew the meeting was a risk, but he could not let the opportunity pass. The proposal took 15 minutes to explain. Raymond laid out his plan with diagrams and calculations. A small team would infiltrate the bridge at night, working underwater to replace key structural pins with weakened substitutes. The modifications would be invisible from above. The bridge would continue to function normally, carrying light traffic without any sign of damage. But when a heavy convoy crossed, when the combined weight of multiple loaded trucks concentrated on the central span, the weakened pins would fail. The stone pillars would separate from the wooden deck, and the entire middle section of the bridge would slide sideways into the river, carrying everything on it to destruction. The beauty of the plan, Raymond explained, was its patience. The bridge would not be destroyed immediately. It would wait for the perfect moment when maximum damage could be inflicted, when the Germans least expected failure. A convoy trapped on a collapsing bridge could not retreat, could not advance, could only fall. Colonel Barrett listened without expression. When Raymond finished, the colonel was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Exactly. More the laugh of a man who has just heard something so absurd that he cannot quite believe it was meant seriously. Barrett called in his executive officer, Major Thomas Hendricks, and asked Raymond to repeat the proposal. Raymond repeated it. Hendricks did not laugh. He stared at Raymond as if examining an interesting specimen of mental illness. The rejection was swift and absolute. The plan was impractical. The risks were unacceptable. The engineering was theoretical at best. The army did not sabotage bridges. It built them or blew them up, nothing in between. Raymond was thanked for his creativity and dismissed. Word of the proposal spread through the battalion within hours. By dinner, Raymond was the subject of jokes in every mess tent. The sergeant who wanted to tickle a bridge to death. The engineer who thought he could outsmart German trucks with a handful of pins. The fool who did not understand that war was about force, not cleverness. Raymond endured the mockery in silence. He had expected nothing else, but he did not abandon his idea. Instead, he began planning how to execute it without authorization, a decision that would either end his military career or prove everyone wrong. The first challenge was reconnaissance. Raymond needed to see the bridge up close to confirm that his theoretical analysis matched reality. This meant crossing into German-controlled territory, reaching the river, and examining the structure without being detected. He found an unlikely ally in Corporal James Whitfield, a scout from the 4th Infantry Division who had been attached to Raymond's unit for a road-clearing operation. Whitfield was young, reckless, and bored, exactly the kind of soldier who might agree to an unauthorized mission if it promised excitement. Raymond approached him carefully, framing the reconnaissance as routine engineering assessment. Whitfield agreed immediately, eager for any excuse to escape the monotony of rear area duty. They crossed the lines on the night of February 24th, moving through forest so dark that Raymond could barely see his own hands. By midnight, They were lying in undergrowth 50 yards from the bridge, watching a German sentry pace across the span. Raymond studied the structure through binoculars, confirming what he had suspected from the aerial photographs. The bridge was exactly as he had imagined. 3 stone pillars supporting a wooden deck, connected by iron pins that were visible as dark spots against the lighter stone. The pins were old, weathered, probably original to the 1890s construction. They would be difficult to remove, but not impossible. The reconnaissance also revealed something unexpected. The Germans had reinforced the bridge's approaches with sandbags and machine gun positions, but they had done nothing to the bridge itself. They trusted the stone and iron that had stood for 50 years. They had no reason to imagine that the structure's strength could be turned into weakness. Raymond and Whitfield returned before dawn. Raymond now had everything he needed except authorization, and he had decided that authorization was no longer necessary. Over the following days, he assembled materials, iron pins that matched the dimensions of the originals but were made of inferior metal, carefully scored to fail under specific loads. He calculated weights, stress tolerances, and failure cascades. The first work night was March 1st. Raymond crossed alone, leaving Whitfield behind. The corporal was willing to scout, but underwater demolition work was beyond his skills, and Raymond did not trust anyone else to understand what he was doing. The water was paralyzing. The Sauer in early March was barely above freezing, fed by snowmelt from the hills. Raymond had prepared for cold, but nothing could truly prepare a human body for immersion in water that felt like liquid ice. Within minutes, his hands were numb. Within an hour, his entire body was shaking so violently that he could barely grip his tools. But he worked. Clinging to the underside of the bridge, hidden from the sentry's view by the stone pillars, he located the first of the iron pins and began the painstaking process of removal. The old metal was corroded, fused to the stone by decades of rust. Each pin took nearly 2 hours to extract, working with wrenches and chisels in near total darkness. He replaced 2 pins that first night. 14 remained. The pattern continued over the following nights. Raymond would cross the lines after dark, slip into the river, work until his body could no longer function, then retreat before dawn. Each night he replaced 2 or 3 pins, depending on conditions. Each night he came closer to hypothermia, to discovery, to failure. On the 4th night, a German patrol passed within 30 feet of his hidden position, while Raymond pressed himself into the shadow of a stone pillar and prayed. On the 7th night, he dropped a wrench into the current and spent 20 agonizing minutes diving to retrieve it. On the 9th night, his hands were so numb that he worked entirely by memory. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Every night he spent in that freezing water, he thought about the German convoys rolling across the bridge above him, carrying supplies that would kill American soldiers. Every pin he replaced was a small act of resistance against the grinding machinery of war. By the night of March 6th, all 16 pins had been replaced. The bridge looked exactly as it had before: ancient stone, weathered wood, iron fittings dark with rust. But beneath the surface, the structure was now a trap waiting to be sprung. Raymond added one final modification: a steel cable, nearly invisible against the river bottom, running from the central pillar to a position on the American-controlled bank. The cable was connected to a release mechanism that would pull the weakened pins simultaneously, ensuring that the collapse happened at exactly the right moment, rather than randomly under traffic. 11 nights of work, 11 nights of freezing water and terror and exhaustion, 11 nights that no one in his battalion knew about, that no one would ever know about unless the plan worked. On the morning of March 7th, Raymond returned to his unit and waited for a convoy to come. Intelligence reported the convoy at 600 hours. A supply column of significant size was forming at a German depot 12 miles east of the bridge, preparing to move west toward Wehrmacht units defending against the American advance. The column would cross the Sauer Bridge sometime in the early afternoon. Raymond had no authority to order an ambush. He had no authority to position troops along the riverbank. He had no authority to do anything except continue his regular engineering duties and pretend that nothing unusual was happening. But he had spent 11 days making allies. Corporal Whitfield had talked. Not officially, he knew better than to report an unauthorized reconnaissance, but informally, to friends in his platoon, who talked to friends in other platoons, who talked to sergeants, who talked to lieutenants. The story of the crazy engineer who was doing something secret at the German bridge had spread through the forward units like a rumor of extra rations. Most soldiers dismissed it as fantasy, but a few were curious. A few wanted to know what Sergeant Caldwell was planning and whether it might actually work. Lieutenant Peter Novak was one of the curious ones. He commanded a reconnaissance platoon that had been probing the German lines for weeks, looking for weaknesses. When he heard the rumors about Raymond's bridge, he sought the sergeant out and demanded an explanation. Raymond told him everything: the pins, the cable, the 11 nights of preparation, the theory of controlled collapse, the waiting trap. Novak listened with the expression of a man who is hearing either genius or madness and cannot quite determine which. When Raymond finished, the lieutenant was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that could have ended his career. He ordered his platoon to move into position along the American-controlled riverbank, ostensibly for routine reconnaissance, actually to provide fire support when Raymond's trap was sprung. He did this without authorization, without reporting to his superiors, without any official justification, except his own judgment that this strange sergeant might be right. By noon, 40 American soldiers were hidden in the tree line overlooking the bridge. They had no idea what they were waiting for. They only knew that Lieutenant Novak had told them something was going to happen. Raymond crouched behind his wall of sandbags, the cable release in his hands. The convoy appeared at 1340 hours. Raymond counted the vehicles as they emerged from the trees. Heavy trucks, most of them, Opel Blitz models with canvas-covered cargo beds. Behind them came fuel tankers, their cylindrical bodies gleaming dully in the grey afternoon light. A command car with officers, a motorcycle escort, 24 vehicles in total, stretching back along the road like a metal snake. The lead truck reached the bridge approach. Raymond felt his heart stop, then restart with painful intensity. This was the moment. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The first truck rolled onto the span. The wooden planks creaked under its weight, but held. The bridge looked solid, trustworthy, exactly as it had for 50 years. The second truck followed, then the third, then the fourth. Raymond watched the procession with agonizing attention, counting vehicles, calculating weight. His father had taught him to think in terms of load distribution, how weight moved through a structure, where stress concentrated, when critical mass would be reached. He had calculated that 14 to 16 trucks would be necessary to ensure catastrophic failure. Fewer than that, and the collapse might be partial, allowing some vehicles to escape. 10 trucks on the bridge now. 11. 12. The span was groaning audibly, the sound carrying across the water like the complaint of some ancient creature, being asked to bear more than it could stand. But the bridge held. The Germans drove on, trusting the stone and iron that had never failed them. 14 trucks, 15, 16. Raymond's hand tightened on the cable release. Not yet. A few more. Maximum destruction required maximum patience. 18, 19, 20. The 21st truck was at the midpoint of the span when Raymond pulled the cable. The effect was not immediate. For perhaps 2 seconds, nothing visible changed. Then the center of the bridge seemed to shiver, as if awakening from a long sleep. The stone pillars, no longer connected to the wooden deck by solid iron, began to separate. The deck, no longer supported by the pillars, began to tilt, and then everything happened at once. The middle section of the bridge slid sideways, rotating as it fell, carrying 14 trucks with it into the Sauer. The vehicles tumbled over each other as they dropped, cabs crumpling, cargo beds tearing open, men leaping from windows and doors into the freezing chaos below. The sound was overwhelming. Stone grinding, metal screaming, water exploding, voices shouting in German and then cutting off as the current pulled them under. Trucks that had not yet reached the collapse zone slammed their brakes, skidding on the wooden planks. Some sliding sideways into the gaps where the deck had been. Trucks that had already passed the center found themselves stranded on a section of bridge that was now an island, connected to nothing, slowly tilting as the remaining supports failed. Raymond watched it all from behind his sandbags. He watched the command car tumble end over end into the river, officers spilling from its doors like broken toys. He watched a fuel tanker rupture and catch fire, flames spreading across the water's surface despite the current. He watched men struggle in the freezing water, some swimming for shore, others dragged down by the weight of their equipment. Lieutenant Novak's soldiers opened fire. The ambush was devastating. The German survivors had no cover, no organization, no way to fight back. Those who reached the riverbank were cut down before they could form a defensive position. It was over in less than 15 minutes. 24 German trucks destroyed or captured, an estimated 80 Wehrmacht soldiers killed or wounded. A supply convoy worth more than Raymond could calculate. Ammunition, fuel, medical equipment, food, lost to the river and the flames and the guns of 40 American soldiers who had trusted a plan that everyone had called stupid. Raymond sat behind his sandbags as the shooting faded and the silence returned. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt only a vast hollow exhaustion, as if the 11 nights of freezing water had finally caught up with him all at once. He had proven them wrong. Every officer who had laughed, every engineer who had dismissed him, every soldier who had joked about tickling bridges to death, they had all been wrong, and he had been right. But being right, he discovered, did not feel the way he had imagined. It felt like sitting alone on a riverbank, watching bodies float downstream, wondering if the men he had killed had families waiting for them somewhere in the ruins of Germany. The aftermath came quickly and chaotically. Lieutenant Colonel Barrett arrived at the scene within hours, summoned by reports of an unauthorized engagement that had somehow destroyed an entire German convoy. He found Raymond sitting exactly where he had been during the ambush, staring at the ruined bridge as American engineers began the process of clearing debris and constructing a replacement span. The colonel's expression was unreadable as he listened to Novak's account of what had happened. When the lieutenant finished, Barrett turned to Raymond and asked a single question. "Is this what you proposed to me 3 weeks ago?" Raymond nodded. He was too exhausted for explanations, too drained for justification. Whatever punishment was coming, he would accept it. Barrett was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that Raymond had not expected. He laughed. Not the dismissive laugh of their earlier meeting, but something different. The laugh of a man who has just been proven spectacularly wrong and finds himself unable to be angry about it. "Sergeant," Barrett said, "you are either the most brilliant engineer I've ever met or the luckiest fool in the United States Army. I genuinely cannot determine which." There was no court-martial. The destruction of the convoy was too valuable, too perfectly timed. Barrett filed a report that carefully omitted certain details, and Raymond found himself promoted to technical sergeant with a commendation for innovative engineering solutions. The story spread through the Third Army within days. Other units began requesting Raymond's consultation on demolition projects. Engineers who had laughed at his proposal now sought his advice on how to replicate his methods. The bridge trap became a subject of tactical discussion, analyzed and debated, and eventually incorporated into training materials for future conflicts. Raymond participated in these discussions when ordered to, but he took no pleasure in them. Something had changed in him during those 11 nights in the freezing water. Something that the destruction of the convoy had completed rather than resolved. He understood now that cleverness in war was still war, that elegant destruction was still destruction, that the bodies floating downstream had been men with names and histories and people who loved them. He did not regret what he had done. The convoy he destroyed would have supplied German units that killed American soldiers. The bridge trap had saved lives, even as it took them. In the calculus of war, his actions were justified, perhaps even necessary. But justification was not the same as peace. Understanding was not the same as acceptance. The war in Europe ended 2 months later. Raymond was present when German forces in his sector surrendered, watching columns of Wehrmacht soldiers march into captivity with expressions of exhaustion and relief. He did not speak to any of them. He did not know what he would have said. Raymond returned to Ohio in September 1945. His father was waiting for him at the train station in Marietta, older now, grayer, but with the same sharp eyes that had taught Raymond everything he knew about how things were built and how they fell apart. They did not speak about the war during the drive home. They did not speak about it for several days. But one evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set over the Ohio River, William asked his son a simple question. "Did you use what I taught you?" Raymond thought about the question for a long time before answering. He thought about the iron pins and the freezing water, and the sound of stone grinding against stone as the bridge collapsed. He thought about the bodies in the river, and the flames on the water and the silence that followed the ambush. "Yes," he said finally. "I used it." William nodded. He did not ask for details. He did not need them. He understood, as perhaps only another engineer could understand, that knowing how to make things fall was a burden as much as a skill, a knowledge that could save lives and take them, that could end wars and haunt the men who wielded it. "Good," William said, and that was all. Raymond took a job with the Ohio Department of Transportation in 1946. He spent the next 35 years building bridges, not destroying them but building them. Each one was a small act of creation to balance against the destruction he had caused in Germany. He married in 1948, a woman named Helen, who had grown up in Marietta. They had 2 children who grew up hearing nothing about their father's military service, except that he had been an engineer somewhere in Europe. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake from dreams of cold and darkness and falling stone. He never regretted that choice, but he never forgot it either. In 1987, Raymond received a letter from a historian working on a book about unconventional warfare tactics in World War II. The historian wanted to interview Raymond about his methods. Raymond declined the interview, but he did write a short response explaining what had driven him to develop the plan. "My father taught me that every structure has a way it wants to fail," Raymond wrote. "Understanding that truth can help you build things that stand forever. It can also help you destroy things that need to be destroyed. The wisdom is knowing which is which. I am still not certain I knew, but I made my choice, and I lived with it. That is all any of us can do." He died in 2003 at the age of 84, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. His obituary mentioned his long career with the Ohio Department of Transportation, his service in World War II. It did not mention the Sauer River or the 24 trucks. But his grandson, a young man named Michael, found the letter from the historian while sorting through Raymond's papers after the funeral. He found the box of medals in the closet. He found a small notebook filled with sketches of bridges and a single phrase, written on the last page. "They laughed because they did not understand. Understanding is not always a gift." Michael read those words and felt something shift inside him, a recognition of depths in his grandfather that he had never suspected. He kept the notebook. He kept the medals. And sometimes, when he was working on a difficult problem, he would think about his grandfather preparing a trap that everyone had called stupid and proving that understanding how things break can be just as important as understanding how they stand. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments what touched you most, and tell us where you are watching from today. These stories survive when we remember them together, and together we ensure that the lessons of the past are never forgotten, even when they are painful to recall. The men who laughed at Raymond Caldwell were not evil. They simply could not see what he saw. And in the end, the difference between wisdom and foolishness is often just a matter of perspective, and the courage to act on what you believe, even when everyone around you says you are wrong.